In that day, Jesus went out from the house and sat alongside the sea, and there were gathered to him many crowds of people, so that he, having gotten in the boat, sat down, and all the crowd was on the seashore standing. And he was speaking many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, the sower went out to sow, and in his sowing some fell alongside the road, and the birds, I think there it's the ravens, just the birds gobbled it down. And others fell in the rocky soil where there was not much earth, and straightway having sprung up, because it did not have depth of earth, but when the sun rose, it was burnt, and because it had no root, it dried up. Others fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. And others fell on the good ground, and they kept giving fruit, 100, 160, and 130. The one having an ear to hear, let him hear. And the disciples, having come to him, said, Why are you speaking to them in parables? And he, in reply, said to them, To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of the heavens, but to those it has not been given. For whoever has, it will be given to him, and he will abound, but whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. On account of this, I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they put it together. And this is in order that the prophecy of Isaiah might be fulfilled to him, the prophecy which says, Hear with a hearing, but do not put it together. See, be seeing, and see, but do not fully see. For the heart of this people is fat, and they hear with ears of difficulty, and they shut their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I will heal them. Blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear. Indeed, I say to you that many prophets and just men desired to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Therefore, you hear the parable of the sower. When any person hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches the thing having been sown in his heart. This is the one having been sown by the way. The one having been sown on rocky ground, this is the one hearing the word, and straightway with joy receives it. He does not have root in himself, but is temporary. And when persecution or affliction comes on account of the word, straightway he is scandalized. The one having been sown among the thorns, this is the one having heard the word, and the cares of this age and the deceitfulness of wealth chokes out the word, and it becomes unfruitful. The one having been sown in good ground, this is the one having heard the word and understanding. He is the one who bears fruit and makes 100, 160, and 130. He placed another parable to them, saying, The kingdom of the heavens is like to a man sowing good seed in his field. But when the workmen slept, and his enemy came and sowed tares in the midst of the wheat, and the enemy left. And whenever the wheat blossomed and made fruit, then also the tares became evident. And the servants of the master, having come to him, said, Lord, did you not sow good seed in your field? Whence therefore are the tares? He said to him, a hateful man has done this, an enemy has done this. And the servant said to him, do you want us, having gone out, to gather them together? And he said, no, lest when you gather the tares, you accidentally pull up the grain with them. Leave them to grow both together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the harvesters, collect first the tares and bind them up into sheaves in order that they be burned up, but the grain collect into my barn. Another parable he placed to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man having taken sows in his field, which is smaller than all of the seeds, but whenever it sprouts, it's the greatest of the vegetables and becomes a tree, so that, quote, the birds of the heavens come and nest in his branches. Another parable he was saying to them, the kingdom of heaven is like unto yeast, which a woman having taken hid in a measure of 3 measures of flour until the whole thing becomes leaven. Jesus was saying all these things in parables to the crowds, and without a parable, he was saying nothing to them, in order that the thing having been written by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter hidden things, having been hidden from the foundation of the world. Then, having left the crowds, he went into the house, and there came to him his disciples, saying, relate to us the parable of the tares of the field. And having replied, he said, the sower sows good seed. The sower who sows good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the cosmos. The good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. The tares are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the consummation of the age. The harvesters are angels. Therefore, just as the tares are collected and are burned up in fire, thus will be in the consummation of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will collect from his kingdom all the scandals and all those who do lawlessness. And they will, quote, cast them into the furnace of fire, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the just ones will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one having an ear to hear, let him hear. Likewise is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like to a treasure having been hidden in a field, which a man having found from joy goes and sells all that he has, and he buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like to a man who's a merchant seeking good pearls, and having found one pearl of great price, having gone out, having sold all that he has, he buys it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like to a net cast into the ocean, and which gathers from all different kinds of things, which when it is full, having been taken up onto the shore, they sit down and they collect the good into baskets, and the sorry ones they throw out. Thus it will be in the consummation of the age. The angels will go and they will separate the wicked from the midst of the just, and, quote, they will throw them into the furnace of fire, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do you understand all these things? And they said to him, yes. And he said to them, on account of this, every scribe, having been trained into the kingdom of heaven, is like to a man who's ruler of a house, who, cast from his treasure, both new and old. When Jesus finished these parables, he left there, and having gone into his fatherland, he was teaching in their synagogue, so that they were amazed and said, "Whence is the wisdom and these powers? Is this not the son of the carpenter? Is his mother not the one called Mary? Are not his brothers James, Jacob, and Joseph, Simon and Judah? And are his sisters all not here with us? Whence are all these things to this one?" And they were scandalized at him. And Jesus said to him, "Prophet is not dishonored except in his fatherland and in his own house." And he did not do there many miracles because of their disbelief. Okay, so what do you find interesting about chapter 13? What strikes you about chapter 13? What do you notice about chapter 13? What do you find confusing about chapter 13? It seems to be a collection of parables that Matthew put together, as many different parables as he could find, and they're all in this one chapter. What else do you notice? It's all about the kingdom of heaven.
Isn't the parable of the sower one of the only parables that Jesus explained?
Yeah, there are a couple that he explains, but the main one that he explains is the parable of the sower. What do you make of that, Abigail?
That he thought it was important enough for them to get the meaning right away, not only for his disciples but for us.
Yeah, it kind of gives us a template, how to go through and look at things. What do you make of the parable of the sower? Did any of you in the homework look up the sower's cove? And did you find the little MP3 thing and listen? So if you know, in that picture down by the tree, there's just a little tiny person by the tree. That's the person speaking. And the recording is made like half a mile away. They estimate 10,000 people could have sat in that amphitheater and heard someone just speaking, which is amazing. I think I've stood there, and it's just odd. I mean, it looks like the grassy bowl almost, but the acoustics are just so balanced that you can stand there on the shore and talk. And it's only a quarter of a mile from Capernaum. So Capernaum is right there, and then a little south of Capernaum is the Sower's Cove, and they think that that's where this was. It talks about great crowds, and he's in a boat, and they're hearing him, and the acoustics are so well in that place. You wonder if that isn't the actual place where Jesus was. What do you make of the parable of the sower? I think I asked you in the homework, give me kind of the Arminian explanation. Give me a Calvinist explanation. Which one do you think is like more right, or both those ideas perhaps even the wrong questions to ask?
I find it interesting that this parable could be used on both sides.
It could be used on both sides. So
the Arminian, it talks about spreading the seed everywhere, like not just to the ones that would seem to get it the most, or
spread.
to would obviously produce fruit, but just throw it everywhere, and if it grows, it grows. With the Calvinist point of view, it's only the good ground that is able to produce fruit. So it doesn't matter where the seed has been tossed, but it's only going to grow on that good ground.
Yeah, so the point, if you're coming at this with Calvinist presuppositions, the point is it's the farmer that makes the good ground good. The farmer pulls up the rocks. The farmer pulls up the weeds. The farmer ropes off the field. The farmer makes the good ground good. And when the seed does go everywhere, it seems like it grows in places, but in reality, the only place it bears fruit is in the ground that the farmer has made good.
Is that the Arminian or the Calvinist?
I think that would be the Calvinist or a Calvinist interpretation. The Arminian interpretation would be that the seed is sown everywhere, and the point of the parable is you need to be good ground. So if you reject, if you let the weeds choke it out, then it is totally your fault, because you need to be better ground. You need to make sure that you are better ground to receive the sown seed. Yeah, can an Ethiopian change his skin? Can a leper change his spots? Then so too you who are accustomed to do evil can learn to do good. It is interesting that God will say things like, circumcise your own heart. But then God will say, I have to circumcise your heart.
There is an element of like you circumcising your own heart. I mean, like most of the things that we attribute to God are things that He does through us. So it is things we do. It's more just like, are we going to say, well, this was me, look at what I did. We're going to say that. Because in a way, it was God all along.
It's interesting to me that Jesus does not include in his interpretation of the parable an Arminian interpretation or a Calvinist interpretation. He leaves that. He identifies the elements, but he leaves like what the overall point is about should I come to this and take the point, be better dirt, or should I come to this and say, oh God, work on this dead heart, this rocky field, pull up the weeds, keep me from being walked on by the world so that I can be good ground and bear fruit. Jesus doesn't say that. He does give this cryptic, the one who has an ear to hear, let him hear. And did you look at the Old Testament background about that again? Yeah. Every time I've done it, I'll do ear asterisk because I want ears too, and hear asterisk. And that pulls up every sentence that has ear and hear in this same. Of course, it pulls up earth. It gave me what I was asking for. But I think the background, well, I wonder if the background isn't Deuteronomy 29:4. So this is Moses' last sermon. He's a few seconds away from the last words he'll ever speak. 2 chapters later, he's dead. Final sermon to Israel. He goes through and he lays out extraordinary blessings and extraordinary curses. And then kind of the conclusion of this lifelong ministry, Moses says, to this day, the Lord hasn't given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. And the point of that, at least some scholars of the Pentateuch will say, is that it's anticipating the new covenant, that Moses knew the Mosaic covenant was never going to work. God made it appealing, God made it attractive, but Moses knew that it would never work. And so he ends by saying, what you really need is a new heart. What you really need is for God to circumcise your heart so that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. That's picked up by David in his Bathsheba incident after he's murdered Uriah and been confronted by Nathan. And he says, create in me a clean heart, O God, a lave tahor, a pure heart, and make new a ruach, a spirit within me. So David's saying, if I'm ever going to be a good person, you're going to have to bara a pure heart in me the same way you bara'd the heavens and the earth when you created it out of nothing. If I'm going to have a pure heart, if I'm going to have a new spirit, you're going to have to do it because I can't. That's what David says in his repentance. It's very odd to me that Ezekiel picks up exactly those words when he describes the new covenant. He says, well, God's giving you the words, but God says, I will tahar your heart and you will be clean. I will hadash your spirit. So the same two things that David prayed for is what God promised. And when I try to put all three of those together, knowing that Ezekiel 36 is interpreting the new covenant, I'm seeing that the promise is that God is going to have to do this new covenant work. For me, that falls a little more on the Calvinist side than the Arminian side, but I recognize that there are problems with both views, and there are going to be counter arguments, but just in terms of my approaching the data, it looks like Jesus, with that statement, ears to hear, if he was accustomed to reading Deuteronomy, then it seems to me that that's the background. And I will point out that I think it's Deuteronomy 18, it could be 17. One of the requirements for king of Israel is to write out by hand a copy of Deuteronomy. It may be a copy of the entire Pentateuch. If it's the entire Pentateuch, that's hundreds of pages. And the king of Israel, was to read that. He was to have the scribes check that he copied it rightly, but then he was to have that read to himself every single day of his life, which is probably the reason why God's so mad with David when he moves the ark without the poles, because David should have known better if he had written out Deuteronomy by hand, or the Pentateuch, and was having it read to him every single day. He should have known how to deal with the ark, and he didn't. And so God says, I'm holding you culpable for breaking a law that you should have known. Solomon should have written out the Pentateuch, and if he had, he would hear in Deuteronomy, don't multiply wives, don't multiply money, don't multiply chariots. So Solomon marries 300 wives, and to round it out, 700 mistresses. And I may have those numbers backward, but it's 700 wives, 300 mistresses. And then he measured his yearly income in tons of gold, so much that it devalued silver, that silver was worthless. And then he had to build cities to house his chariots and horses. If he had been writing out the law, he would have known he was violating all three things. And it does say in Kings that the foreign wives turned Solomon's heart away from God. And what's interesting about that is Proverbs, many of which were written by Solomon, he goes to his son and says, my son, listen to me, don't give your heart to, foreign women. And it's like, Dad, really? Don't give my heart to foreign women? You're married to 700 foreign women and you have 300 mistresses? And you're saying, and if that's Rehoboam, Solomon's trying to give him wisdom. Rehoboam ends up being one of the most foolish kings there is. And so you've got this wisdom, but it's like, do as I say, not as I do, and there's a failure there. So I don't know. It seems to me that Jesus would know Deuteronomy. He quotes from Deuteronomy more than any other book. If that's true, then this background, he has an ear to hear, let him hear, that would presuppose God giving an ear to hear, and that would lean it, at least for me, in the direction of a more Calvinist interpretation. And if so, the application would be, if you are responding to God, not to say, oh, I'm good ground. It's, oh God, thank you for pulling the rocks up and pulling the weeds out and keeping people from walking on me, because dirt's dirt until the farmer makes the field good. I think that would be the application if that's the way you're leaning with it. What else do you find interesting as we've gone through these?
That verse, verse number 58, gets interpreted in a lot of interesting ways.
Yeah, there's a lot. He did not do many miracles there because of their unbelief. Unbelief frustrates the work of God. The question is, why does it frustrate the work of God? And, it raises a question, what is faith? Is faith that something we muster on our own apart from the work of God? Or is faith something that's given to us? Is faith a fruit of the new heart, of the new covenant? Or is faith something that we have before God does his new covenant work? And that debate is a heated debate. And let me just give you an example of how heated it is. So, have any of you memorized the fruit of the Spirit? So, the fruit of the Spirit is it 22? No. Well, I'm trying to find the passage. Is it 2? I thought I was almost certain it was in Galatians. What is it? Galatians 5? Yeah. The fruit of the Spirit. Notice it's one fruit that has 9 different expressions. Is agape, is chara, joy, eirene, peace, macrothumia, patience, Christates, that's kind of a gracious goodness where you're just kind to people and your kindness actually makes good things happen.
Is the word for patience literally
Big thuma, yeah. Goodness. And then how is the last word translated? Look at this. In every English translation, faithfulness, faithfulness, faithfulness. Yeah. Coleman Standard Bible. Bible in Basic English. So, Daniel, what do you notice about that word?
It's the word faith.
It's the word faith, and it's translated faith how many times in the New Testament, would you imagine? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times.
If I were to write faithfulness, is that how I would write it?
I would write faithfulness osune. Osune is how you do any ness word in. Yeah, agathosune. That's the standard way to do any ness word. Now, what's the difference if you translate the fruit of the Spirit as faith versus faithfulness? Is there any difference?
If you say faith, that sounds like you have faith in what will come from the Spirit.
Faith is something the Spirit produces in the life of the believer.
It's almost like faith is the action.
Yeah. Faith is much more me-oriented, I think, or it's not as jarring to me to read the word as faithfulness, but when I read it as faith, then it makes even my faith as a fruit of the Spirit, not a fruit of anything inherent in me. Of course, Ephesians 2, for by grace are you saved through faith, and this, that is this whole thing, repentance, faith, all of it, is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no man can boast. And I know people quibble about what this is, whether it includes faith or doesn't. It's a pretty technical, grammatical thing. To me, it looks like it's saying all of it is from God. Faith, repentance, all of it. So, Luke, how would that play with Matthew 13:58?
Just like, I suppose, just like those mighty works, even the faith they had without the didn't have without the Spirit.
It's like light shining in the darkness. God coming to a world that's dead dark, without form and void, under the waters of judgment. And he doesn't say, just try a little.
Like the other people who have asked for miracles, like the leper and the blind, God, if you, Jesus, if you will. A lot of them had something that these people in Nazareth did not. Probably from God, from faith that they got from God. But they trusted Jesus to heal them, to do something about them. The bleeding lady touched his tassel. But these people are just
Didn't you grow up right around the corner? Don't we know who your sister is? You can't be anybody if we know who your sister is. I mean, that's kind of the, which is strange. And Jesus says this is playing a pattern out that's always in Scripture, that a prophet's only dishonored by his own people. The other people honor the prophet.
It even plays out with the Pharisees. Jesus is Jew, and they're persecutors.
Yeah, it's like, well, he didn't go to the right college. He didn't, he can't be anybody because he didn't, study with us. So they reject him.
Makes me think of the passage with, it's the one with the centurion where he comes to Jesus and says, I believe, help my unbelief.
Belief, yeah.
Upon reading this, I think when it says that he will not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief, I thought maybe he was saying he chose not to do works because nothing good.
Yeah.
But then there is places where, like Jesus couldn't cast out the demon the first time, but the second time.
I think that one is an acted parable because he heals the man, he half heals him. And he says, what do you see? And I think it's in Mark 8 or 9, and he says, I see men walking around as trees. I think it's Mark 8. And then he touches him and he sees clearly. Well, the very next pericope in Mark is, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, Son of the living God. And so Peter saw, and Jesus even says, God has shown you this. But then Jesus says, so I'm going to suffer and die. And Peter says, no, you're not. May this never happen. So Peter can see, but he can't see clearly what the Christ is. And so it may be that parable, that Jesus is foreshadowing what's about to happen in this story, and the whole life of Jesus and death and resurrection is the second touch, where the disciples realize what they're thinking the Messiah is about like seeing men walk around like trees. They can see a little bit, but they don't see very clearly. And it's only after Jesus dies and teaches them that they realize clearly why Jesus is having to suffer and die. I didn't come up with that on my own. That's Gordon Fee in How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. I think he uses that as an example of make sure you read what happens before and what happens after to help you put things in perspective.
You had us read that.
I wanted to ask about the verse where it says, too much is given, who has much more to give?
Yeah. That's toward the end, isn't it?
It's 10, verse 10 through 15.
Oh, at the beginning, I was dead wrong. To you it has been granted, bless you, to know the mysteries of the kingdom of the heavens. To those it has not been given. That kind of leans on the Calvinist side too, saying the reason you understand is because you've been granted. For whoever has, it will be given to him, and he will abound. And whoever does not have, even what he has, I suppose we're to think what he seems to have, that will be taken from him. I think in the context of the parable that's the seed that doesn't have much depth. It springs up. It looks like it's a healthy plant until the sun comes out, and then it withers because it doesn't have any root. It just looks like a plant for a little while.
So, Jesus, when he's explaining it, says, the rocky soil is those who receive the word with gladness. It springs up quickly in their hearts, but it withers away when troubles come because they have no depth. He says they accept it. And then it withers away. What does that mean? Jesus says, all whom you have given me, I have kept. I've not lost one.
Yeah. Can I show you something in Greek? I have a Hebrew class, and they make fun of me. I always say, do we have a little time for biblical theology? And they all say, that's a stupid question. We always have time for biblical theology. So, John has an interesting thing about the word believe. When he was in Jerusalem during Passover, during the festival, many pisteuoed him, right? Temporal augment, aorist, it's an indicative, it's a fact, it's not a subjunctive optative. He's saying they believed in him. They believed in his name, seeing the signs which he did. Many believed Jesus. Look at the next verse in Greek and tell me what you find interesting. Many believed Jesus. What does the next verse say? He didn't believe them.
Is that the same word for pity?
It's the same word, same. I think if John were here, he would say many believed, quote unquote. Quote unquote. Knew you. Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons? Did we not perform miracles? Those are people who are certain that they've believed in Jesus. And clearly they're not people who lost their salvation, because Jesus says to them, depart from me because I never knew you. These are people who are certain they're Christians and never were Christians. Now, I say that, and does the terror meter in your heart just go like through the roof? It doesn't mind. It's like, well, if these people, okay, listen to what they say. Jesus says, you've got to go to hell. And their response is, Lord, Lord, did we not perform miracles? Did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons? Lord, Lord, did we not do these things? What are those people trusting in? Lord, I can't go to hell. I'm a preacher. Lord, I can't go to hell. I teach Greek at Bryan College. Lord, I can't go to hell. I'm a Presbyterian. Versus, was Jesus' life and death not good enough to cover my sins? That's what you say if you're a believer. You're not going to say, Lord, Lord, did we not? Did we not do this? Did we not do that? These people had never trusted in Christ and Christ alone as He's offered in the gospel. They were trusting in themselves. And yes, they were in positions of high authority. They were visible leaders in the church. But Jesus is just saying, look, there are a lot of visible leaders in the church who are going to end up in hell because they never were Christians. And start thinking about that. Balaam looks to me like he ended up in hell. Balaam wrote part of the scriptures. Okay? So, Solomon, I mean, some people say he's repenting. I'm not sure I believe that he's repenting. He wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. He could be in hell. Nebuchadnezzar wrote half of Daniel 4 and probably is in hell. There are people, Judas raised people from the dead. I mean, the text says, raised the dead, they came back and reported. There's no reason to think that Judas was any less miracle working than the rest of them. And clearly he's in hell because Jesus said it would be better if this man were never born. There's nothing you can do in terms of prominence in Christianity that will guarantee that you're a believer other than the simple faith of, I have no goodness on my own, Jesus, and you have all goodness, and I turn from self-rule to your rule, and I want you to save me. So, Daniel, I think their receiving is not this. I think it's how we would say receiving, quote unquote, believing, quote unquote. James does the same thing. Faith without works is dead. I think we would say so-called faith, if it has no works, is not real faith. It's so-called faith. I mean, the other way to do it is that everybody's saved, or 3 of the 4 are saved. They're just unfruitful Christians. They're carnal Christians. So you have, kind of a spiritually productive, that's the bear much fruit if you're good ground, but the other, you're saved, but you just don't produce anything. I don't see that as Jesus' point in what they have will be taken away. But there is a non-sovereign grace interpretation, and I think if you go that way, then you could embrace the idea of carnal Christian. I just don't think that's what Jesus is talking about there. Sorry? I believe that Paul in Romans 7 is talking about his life as a believer. And he could say, "O wretched man that I am," that there are things that I want to do that I don't. There are things I do and I hate when I do them. I think that's Paul as a believer. Because he doesn't say, "O wretched man that I was." He says, "O wretched man that I am." But is Paul a carnal Christian? He goes on to say, well, I know in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good thing. But Paul knows he's got a new heart. And Paul knows that new heart is good. And that's why he can say, when I sin, it's not I who sin. It's the sin that lives in me. So I think he's saying, I've got this new heart that's oriented toward God, it's righteous, it loves God. The problem is I still have the remnants of the flesh. I would define a common Christian as someone with a new heart, but remnants of the flesh. And that those remnants of the flesh at times can have a greater or less impact on the believer. And Paul says, okay, I've got this flesh. The first thing you need to know is there's no condemnation for that. That's a normal thing going on in you as a believer to have the leftovers. And two, by the Spirit's power, put to death the deeds of the body. Kill it. Because if you don't kill it, it's going to kill you. Fight to the death. The carnal Christian, I think, is an artificial category made up to justify someone who's delightfully living in sin and still wants to be certain that they're a believer. And I just don't see that in Scripture. I see plenty of places where people will struggle and fail and have moments of great faith and moments of not faith. But I don't see this kind of everything's okay because Jesus is going to save me in the end and I can just live however I want. I think that's what most people mean when they say carnal Christian, and I don't see that as a category. I do see the struggling Christian as the common category. And I know my flesh is ugly. I mean, my flesh is just not ugly, it's wicked. And I'm in a fight to the death with it. And I want, by the Spirit's power, to lessen. I want to strike more blows on it than it strikes on me. Because I believe that my ultimate pleasure in life is tied up with that flesh having less and less power. I don't know how your Christian walk is, but my flesh seems to triumph more when I'm tired, when I'm emotionally exhausted, when I'm don't have Christian friends around. I think Paul is saying that's what I struggle with, but the good news is it's not the real me, it's just the sin that's still in my flesh. And therefore, I'm not going to give myself over to that. I'm going to fight. There's no condemnation. I'm not earning my way to heaven, but I'm not going to let that get the better of me. And if I fall on my face, I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight again. Because the day's going to come when I see Jesus and I'm just like Jesus. And I want this day to look more and more like that day. Not earning my salvation, but living. I think a perfect analogy is the promised land. God says every inch where the sole of your foot will tread will be your land. And you think, great. The problem is it's full of Canaanite strongholds. It's yours, it's all yours, but in terms of enjoying it, there's all this, that's going to inhibit that. And so I'm going to go to those strongholds one by one, and in the power of Jesus, I'm going to pull the walls down. I'm going to plunder those cities, and I'm going to claim that land as my own, and I'm going to go to the next one. And if I turn around and look, and they're trying to rebuild the one I tore down, I'm going to go back to that one. I'm going to go to the biggest one first, and in the power of Jesus, work to tear that down. Because it's my land. It's my land, and other people are claiming a right to my land. And I'm not going to let them squat on my land. I'm going to run them out. Because God gave me the land. It's my land. And if it's a picture of the Garden of Eden, are you going to let, Satan just build little temptation booths all through the Garden of Eden, or are you going to get your buddies together and you're going to do this nuclear bomb, carpet bomb, and run them out? That's what you're going to do. You're going to guard and keep the garden. You're going to guard and keep the promised land. And Paul says, therefore the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're powerful for the casting down of imagination, the tearing down of strongholds. He's spiritualizing that conquest in terms of our spiritual life, and the strongholds are the strongholds of sin. And that's why he wants us to be ruthless. Don't make a covenant. Don't leave something unconquered, because they'll trip you up. They'll trip you up for the rest of your life if you do that. So, what did you make of this? The birds of the air will come and nest in its branches. So that's from Daniel 4, right? What's weird about Daniel 4? Did anybody read Daniel 4?
I thought it was interesting when I read these two passages that in one is the reverse of the other. We have reading for a mighty thing being brought low, and then in Matthew we have a small thing being made mighty. And one is because it's brought low because of pride, and the other is brought mighty because of humility.
I thought it was interesting that with the bird, usually described as being almost like servants of the devil, and that they take away the things of God. And it's interesting. I never quite understood that part in Daniel where it says they shall rest in branches. Are they talking about, in that case, is it talking about like other nations, or is it talking about the same type of picture as in the sower?
So the key to all of this is Daniel 2. Is that big enough? That's not big enough to see. So in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's the Joseph story all over. The only difference is Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. You tell me what the dream is, or I'll kill you. And nobody can. And so Nebuchadnezzar starts killing people. And Daniel finds out about it and says, whoa, stop, I'll tell him. He prays, and so Daniel, as the new Joseph, gets not only the interpretation, he gets the dream too. And this is what's weird about the dream. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times, seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known the king's matter. So, the king says, can you tell me the dream? And I love Daniel. He says, no. Only God can tell you. So he's not taking any glory for himself. He's saying, God. And it's kind of putting Nebuchadnezzar in his place a little. But there is a God who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came the thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have, more than anybody else alive, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your mind. You saw, O king, behold, a great image. Image was mighty, exceeding brightness, stood before you. Its appearance was frightening. The head of the image was fine gold, its chest and arms silver, middle and thigh of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron, partly of clay. As you looked, a stone, and Abigail, when you made your comment, I was thinking, was cut out by no human hand. Little bitty stone. Little bitty stone. And it struck the image of the feet on the iron and clay. It broke them in pieces. The iron, clay, the bronze, silver, the gold, all together were broken and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain. Starts small, but grows, and it, quote, filled the whole earth. Now, are biblical theological bells going off in your mind? Fill the earth. Is that, oh, that's the dimension. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue, rule over the birds, the air, the fish, all the creeps that creep on the ground. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O King of Kings, to whom God of heaven has given kingdom, power, and authority, might, and glory, and to those into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them, you are the head of gold. Another kingdom, so this is the Babylonian kingdom, you're the head. Another kingdom inferior shall arise to you. Arms and chest, that's the Medo-Persian Empire. Cyrus sacked Babylon. Babylon passed out of existence. The Medo-Persian Empire took its place. Another kingdom inferior to you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze shall rule over all the earth. That's the Macedonian kingdom of Alexander the Great, conquered from one end of the civilized world to the other. There will be a fourth kingdom. Alexander's kingdom was conquered by the Romans. Fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush these things. And as you saw, the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, you know, what happened in 63 BC? Wasn't it that the Roman Empire was seized and became a dictatorship under Julius Caesar? And then a series of emperors, and remind me how many emperors served between Caesar Augustus and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Oh, don't think about that. Nothing good can ever come from looking at the details. There will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron that crushes it will break, crush. And as you saw, the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. With some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. And I know in Rome, when Christians started quoting that of the kingdom of God, people laughed their heads off and said, you're telling me this nothing little religion from the armpit of the world is going to overcome the Roman Empire? Well, it's funny, if you go to Rome today, you can pay $15 to take a bus ride and see the whole city. The Roman Empire is in ruins. The only thing preserved are the temples that were converted into Christian churches. All of those are still there. nothing is of this little nothing kingdom except graffiti and bricks and a little mortar and ruins. That's what's left of the Roman Empire. And how's Christianity doing? Go north, south, east, west, any direction, you're going to find Christians. It's going to fill the whole earth. And the gates of hell will not subdue it. I think when Jesus quotes the kingdom of heaven is like a tree and the birds of the air will rest in his branches, he's drawing the Daniel 4, but he's wanting you to read Daniel 4 in light of Daniel 2. And he's saying Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom failed. Mine is never going to fail. It's going to start small. It's going to take over the whole world. Now, I don't know if you know, but a lot of the Puritans call themselves fifth monarchy men. Have you ever heard of that? Fifth monarchy? Where they're getting it is just what we went over, that there's going to be a fifth monarchy. And I believe in the fifth monarchy, but I think where the Puritans failed is they felt that that was going to be a kingdom that would be implemented by the sword. And so they tried to implement it by the sword and it backfired. I don't think it's holy laws. I think it's holy lives that's going to conquer the world. And so I'm a pietistic postmillennialist rather than a theonomistic postmillennialist. I think it's holy lives, not holy laws. But I do think that Daniel 2 is talking about a fifth kingdom that will never fail, that will fill the whole earth. Not everybody holds that view, but it's one view in church history. Augustine, Athanasius. Oddly enough, William Jennings Bryan held that view too. So, kind of interesting. All right. Well, I think we will end there. I hope you have a good Wednesday. I'll see you on Thursday. We'll do 14.